Right. Well, I hope you can read the PowerPoint up here. It says, Philosophers of Spirit, 4 spiritual insights and an introduction. So not 4 weddings and a funeral, but 4 spiritual insights and an introduction. And we'll see what the first slide says if you can read it. You see this handsome fellow, Pierre de Chardin. The comment that I put up from him says, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Let you ponder that for a little while. While I think of it, while you're pondering that, can I ask who is it who's got the A4 pad and the pen at the moment? Somewhere there's an A4 pad and a pen, and people are writing on that very neatly their email address and their name, so that you can get the PowerPoint, the reading list, and various other goodies as well. Have we located the A4 pad and Jill's pen? Well, maybe. I think. Oh dear. Right. Okay, we'll sort it at half time. Right. So, not human beings having a spiritual experience, says this eminent Jesuit, but we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Now, you might not agree with him, but that's a sort of keynote that I want to offer you. And at my final slide, we'll be bringing this, if you like, a bit more down to earth and to our situation. Question is, what is spirit? Now, I'd chuck this around the room if we had a little bit more time, but I'm going to go straight to the next slide. This one says, the relationship between us and the universe is not simple. On the left-hand side, you can see an eye, and in that eye are various things reflected. On the right-hand side, you see a U with a symbolic eye. In one sense, we could describe ourselves as universe looking at itself. I'm not sure who it was who said it, but a scientist early on in the 20th century said, a physicist is an electron's way of understanding itself. All right? Physicists are made of electrons, just as we are, and other stuff as well. So if an electron wants to understand itself, it needs to get together with a lot of other stuff, form a physicist, and then it can be part of its understanding of itself. Nice little picture of a baby. The two-tone doesn't do it really much justice, but we should be thinking about babies quite a lot. Now, this is the menu. The introduction, spirit, and 21st century particle physics. Don't worry, I'm not a physicist. This is stuff that I think I understand, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Then, Hegel. This is one of Hegel's works, very, very thick, not easy, but if you fancy taking it on and are prepared to give it a couple of months, you'll get an awful lot out of that. This edition, I recommend, have a look at it if you want to in the break, because it's got a summary and an analysis, and it helps no end. This one isn't mine, belongs to daughter number 1, Hegel for Beginners. It is very, very good. Hegel is not easy, but this book will help you no end, and it's got loads of pictures in it. Right, here we go. So, under Hegel, I've said spirit working for freedom. All right, we're going to look at how Hegel sees spirit as underlying everything but everything, and it is working for freedom. Look at Plato, Greek word anamnesis, which means basically remembering. Amnesia is forgetting, right? And or mnemonic is what helps you remember things, and anamnesis is remembering. One of Plato's theories is that as a baby, we basically know everything, but we forget it when we interact with the world of the 5 senses. All right? Might sound a bit crazy. Jill and I were up in London in Trafalgar Square waiting for English National Opera to open, and we saw some stuff chalked on the pavement. And it was a guy called the Homeless Bard. Anybody have come across him, have you? Raise the hand if you have. You have. Is he worth reading?
He's got a point of view.
Well, I think he's worth reading. And this is a quote from the Homeless Bard. All the answers, all the solutions, you have them, for you are a part of everything. Okay? And we will consider that with the concept of a hologram. All right? You know, I wish I had a hologram here, but you can get them off the internet fairly cheaply. Basically, they look like a 3D image. And one of the things about a hologram is, well, what happens if you break a hologram in two? What happens? You have two holograms, but you look at one of the pieces you've got, and what do you see? Pardon? The whole picture. And if you break it again, you still see the whole picture. All right. So, being a little part of everything, you could be containing the whole darn lot. Berkeley, to be is to be perceived. Bishop, once thought to be absolutely on the fringes, with a point of view that could be argued for, but not worth anything. Come the 20th century, suddenly Berkeley comes back into fashion, because people have noticed, who are doing stuff with atom smashers and all that kind of thing. You do an experiment of that kind of level, and just looking at it changes it. Spooky, but to be perceived, said Bishop Berkeley in the 18th century. More of him later. And then Plotinus, a Neoplatonic philosopher of the early years of this era, and a quote from him: "Those ancient sages who sought to secure the presence of divine beings by the erection of shrines and statues showed insight into the nature of the all." So we're looking at temples and that kind of thing, and Plotinus's, I believe, very deep insight, and that will lead us into a final slide that will concern every single one of us here. That's the spiritual footnote. Here we go. What is spirit? Okay, that's easy, isn't it? It's the opposite of matter. All right? That's so easy, isn't it? Well, we shall take a leading idea from 4 philosophers of spirit. We've done that. And the first question is, what is matter? Now, I'm not going to ask for an answer here because we're moving on a bit swiftly because of the time, but I'll give you some pictures, and it's a shame they won't come up too clear. Now, I wonder, can anybody identify anybody in this? These are guys who know what matter is. Anybody? Karl Marx. Where's Karl Marx? Bottom right, okay. Descartes. Where's Descartes?
On the top, first one.
Top left hand, right?
Oh,
Yep.
it's Spinoza.
I'm not Spinoza, no.
No, it's Descartes.
I know it's dreadful. It's a dreadful slide up there. What about the other two? Newton on bottom left, and up there above Karl Marx, contemporary more or less of Descartes. After Descartes, English guy. Nearly Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes. Now these are guys, they know what matter is. Now we won't go into what they would have said it was. Well, it's just Descartes. What would Descartes have said matter was? The opposite of mind. Everything that is either matter or mind, one or the other, right? Nothing in between, mind or matter. So if it's not mind, it's matter. These guys, right? These scientists don't know what matter is anymore. This is a very famous conference in Belgium, in Solvay, in 1928. And if you could see it more clearly, you see Einstein in the middle, and all the sort of big guys, Heisenberg, De Broglie, and so on. They're all there in that. I'm awfully sorry about this. We can't do anything about it. By the way, those who are taking notes, you will get the PowerPoint of this. So help me, if we can find that sheet that people are writing their emails on. It's a blue sheet, a blue A4 block pad. Yes, right. Now, this is an idea. I'm not saying this is the way it is, but it's a way that makes sense to me as somebody who would consider himself to be a spiritual person, but also is interested in science. Okay, if we talk about dimensions, these days, anybody, how many dimensions are we talking about these days regularly?
22.
22 maybe, yeah, any about higher, lower. I'm going to go with 11, right? But there are those who say 22, 27. Right? This is string theory. This is the way that people talk, right? Let's start with what we know about the spatial dimensions: width, height, depth. They're easy to visualize, all right? So a line has got length, right? And that's one dimension. A square is two-dimensional. It's got length and width. Add depth to that. If the sides are all the same length, you've got a cube or a three-dimensional shape. So the human world has only 3 spatial dimensions. You happy with that? Right? Now that doesn't work if you're Einstein and if you're trying to ask the questions he's asking. So Einstein came up with something different, which is a little bit harder to visualize. He says you need 3 dimensions plus time. Now that won't do. That was Newton. You have to replace that with 4 dimensions of space-time. Right? Bear with that. So space and time, you don't distinguish them, and you need 4 dimensions of it. All right? But in a 4-dimensional universe, a lot of 21st century physics doesn't work. Okay? What do when you're having trouble? You turn to the maths. Right? At the level of particle physics, you deal in maths. If the equations work, chances are the technology will work too. You might not understand it, you might not be able to get your head around it, visualizing it, but if the maths works, chances are the rest will work too. So they found they needed 11 dimensions to get the equations to work in terms of making sense of string theory. You ask the question, where are these new dimensions hiding? Because we can see, length and breadth and all that kind of thing. We can feel time, but where are the other dimensions? Well, the general wisdom is they're far too small for us to see. Well, that's the general sort of wisdom. Now, what I'm going to put to you is, could it be that what we call the spiritual world is something like these 7 missing dimensions, and that we are able, in different ways, to get a handle on those dimensions, and that's what our spiritual, when we pray for something, let's say, or when we feel something is being communicated to us, that it's beyond the 5 senses, beyond the 4 dimensions that we're familiar with, that it's something from these 7 dimensions. Now, I hope I haven't offended anybody by saying that. You're not going to put me out of the synagogue or beat me with rods or anything, but I offer you that as what somebody would consider himself to be a spiritual person. I am a committed Christian, and I can't say I'm a member of a church at the moment because Jill and I are in a rather nomadic lifestyle. But that is part of how I go about making some sort of sense of particle physics and my experience as a spiritual being. Now, who's seen this one? La Grande Arche de la Défense. You've seen it, have you? Right? Yeah. Anybody know? Oh, I've written it out the bottom there. Okay, this is the shadow of a hypercube. Okay, what's a hypercube, you say? Let's see. I've lost it. Here we are. All right. If you have this up against the light source, this is 2 dimensions. Stay still for me. And you could see it just from there like that. You would see it's a line, 1 dimension. But it will throw a shadow. So 2 dimensions gives you a one-dimensional view. So a 3-dimensional cube will throw a 2-dimensional shadow. Right? So if you had a hypercube in 4 dimensions, then that mathematically is the shadow it would throw. Okay, don't worry if you can't get your mind around it. I can't. But that's why they did La Grande Arche de la Défense like that. And I was living in Paris at the time they were starting to build it many years ago. Right. going to skip that one. No, we'll skip this one. Right. If you look from a window at a phone line, right, it looks like a one-dimensional line. But if you were to study it up close, you'd see that the cord was actually round. It's three-dimensional. If we unravelled the phone line, we would find lots of different coloured wires inside. So this is how you can have all these different dimensions. The world can look like it's four dimensions or 3 dimensions, but in fact be 7, because when you get up closer, when you examine it more, then you find there are these 11 dimensions. Now, it says maybe spirit is a way we experience the other 7 dimensions, not as an observer, but as a participator. Now, this word participator we're going to use quite a bit later on, because nowadays in doing experiments, you don't talk about the experiment and the experimenter, because just doing the experiment changes stuff at the subatomic level. Just looking at the stuff changes it. Even intending to look at the stuff changes it. How many people knew that before? So wave a hand, will you? A few people did. Okay, so I'm not talking off the top of my head. Yes, it comes into it. Yes, it's indeed. But if you want to explore this one in more detail, the double slit experiment is the great thing. The double slit experiment. But just planning to do an observation, it would seem, changes it. Possibly because the stuff that's happening is outside of time, or is not sort of answerable to time. It is very, very weird. But don't take my word for it. Check it out on the internet. Now, this one, it's a pretty dreadful slide because I had to do it off a screenshot. But this is a guy called James Wheeler, one of the leading people in 20th century quantum mechanics. And I'm going to read it to you. We had this old idea that there was a universe out there, and here is man, the observer, safely protected from the universe by a 6-inch slab of plate glass. Referring to the late 20th century experiments that show us how simply looking at something changes that something, Wheeler continues, now we learn from the quantum world that even to observe so minuscule an object as an electron, we have to shatter that plate glass. We have to reach in there. So the old word observer simply has to be crossed off the books, and we have to put in the new word participator. All right? So I hope you can see that this is bringing us, if you like, into a kind of big unity. Some very spiritual people would say we are all one, or we're part of something greater. Well, at this kind of a level, science would seem to be suggesting that that is in fact the case.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I had that experience trying to get pregnant. There was no way. The moment I forgot about it and I renounced to having a baby, I got pregnant.
Right. Okay. Right. What I will send out to you will have a section on exact. Can I ask your name?
Isabel.
What Isabel said. How many people ever read the book in the 60s, a big book then, Margarita Lasky, called Ecstasy, and it was not about a substance, right? Anybody here read Margarita Lasky's Ecstasy? No? Okay. In it she gives a series of stages in which people have made momentous discoveries, and they've tended to happen when they gave up. All right? Anyway, you'll get that. If we find the pad and if you put your name on and the email address on it. All right. Now, I don't know if you knew about the heart's electromagnetic field, but apparently it is way, way stronger than the brain's. And it stretches a long, long way out from your body. And so, one may say, there is no place where one's body actually ends. No place where it begins at the subatomic level, right? Just to say the field from your heart, that's a field. Okay, a field tends towards 0 the further away you get from the center of it, but it never actually really stops. So us and our relationship with the universe or the world could be seen in spiritual terms, could just as well be seen in that way scientifically. I'm going to skip that one. Max Planck. How are we doing? Quarter of an hour. Now, this is a very interesting quote. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This is not some weirdo. Planck's constant is one of the sort of measurements that is used constantly in science. So this was a guy who was kind of clued up, all right? And he says this mind is the matrix of all matter, and we are participators in both mind and matter. So this idea of a unity, an underlying unity, is not just something that's spiritual people or chanted stuff or sitting cross-legged or on about, but it's there with you leading scientists in the 20th century. Okay, Hegel. Now, the history of the world is none other than the progress of the consciousness of freedom. Have a think about that. Would you agree with that or not?
Freedom from who?
Well, let's just say freedom from slavery.
Who's slave?
Okay, people who are doing stuff they don't want to do for people who are too strong for them. So, let's say, oh my, well, the 19th century movement in America, right? That would be a movement for freedom.
So if one person looks at the reality and by being a witness changes it.
Oh, sorry,
There are
no.
millions of people who are participating in it. So
Oh, sorry, I jumped very quickly from the science to Hegel, right? Now, Hegel is looking at things in the big picture. He's not looking at little stuff, right? He's looking big picture of human history, right? Sorry, that was a little bit abrupt, my transition. Right, let's look at some examples. Right, here he is. Now, Hegel shocked the world, not the world, he shocked the Western world when a clever guy said something like this: what is rational is actual, and what is actual is rational. Basically, he's saying, whatever happens, that's logic. If it doesn't fit with the kind of logic you learned in school, if it doesn't fit with A is not non-A, or X equals X, tough. All right? You need a bigger logic in order to deal with life. Now, I won't go into why people took notice of him saying something so radical. Basically, it was because they weren't doing too well on A is not non-A and X equals X. All right? Or if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. That kind of stuff is fine, but it will only take you so far. Hegel said you need another kind of logic, and this is what he's on about. This one, you probably can't read it from up there. This is called the dialectic of history. Hegel recognizes in spirit, that's everything, according to Hegel, everything is spirit, the history of humanity in which the thought of men overcomes specific bodies of knowledge and unilateral exclusive institutions, and thinks in such a way as to negate contradictory propositions while preserving them dialectically. I'm sorry, that is hard to listen to, but an example would be anger. All right? If you are angry, then that will lead you to do all sorts of violent things. If you're a coward, you will be afraid to do things. Well, courage is, if you like, anger and cowardice meeting up. So you end up with courage with the motivation of anger and the risk assessment of cowardice. If you didn't follow that, wave a hand. Good. Okay. Another example would be the French Revolution. Okay? So, the French Revolution basically was a time of liberty, equality, fraternity. How did it come about? Well, you have the Ancien Regime, Louis the... What was he, Louis the 18th? 16th. I was never good at history. And all that kind of stuff that's suppressing the poor. If you like, there's an example of, if you like, slavery. But it's a very unfair regime. So what happens? You get the French Revolution, and that is a very bloody experience. a lot of people getting killed, violence, and so on. What comes from that? Napoleon, right? Including the authority of the monarchy and the egalitarianism of revolution. The two come together in Napoleon. So Hegel would say that is the movement forward of freedom, right? Spirit is tending towards freedom. Okay? Another example he would give, as a good German, would be the Reformation. And who's this guy? Martin Luther, all right? So, good German hero. So he would say that the freedom that came with Protestantism comes when you have the Roman Catholic Church, which has become corrupt and authoritarian. Along comes Luther and other people who get a bit violent, right? And there are wars of religion, all that kind of thing. But this leads to freedoms that have formed modern Europe and the Industrial Revolution and stuff like that. This is the way that Hegel sees spirit, that it's, if you like, a movement of ideas, thinking, that it's tending towards freedom. And that's one of the pictures, one of the things I want to give you today to be moving with. And we're running out of time, so I'm going to skip some stuff here. You'll get it if you get the PowerPoint. Right? Just do this one quickly. This is Napoleon, at the Battle of Jena in 1806. And Hegel sees Napoleon as the great guy who is going to bring in a new era of freedom and so on. Unfortunately, a lot of people felt that they felt let down by Napoleon. My, at Waterloo, Napoleon did surrender. You know the rest. You can see that another time, perhaps. All right. At that time, Hegel said, "This is the end of history." He thought, yes, Napoleon's the guy. This is going to bring freedom for the masses and all the rest of it. Well, I wonder if Hegel had been alive now, who would he have seen as the successor to Napoleon?
Boris Johnson.
Pretty good, yeah, maybe, or Putin, or Trump, or something like that. I don't know. We'll skip that one very quickly. Now I'm going to skip this next bit because that will take up too much time, and this one as well. Right. Now here we come. Moody Blues. Who remembers this one? The Moody Blues. With the eyes of a child, you must come out and see that your world's spinning round. Who remembers it? Wave a hand if you do. The 60s. If you remember them, you weren't there, but I remember them very well. So, with the eyes of a child, this is picking up on Plato's idea that as a child we have all knowledge, only we forget it as we live in the world of the senses. Now, other people have said that kind of thing. For example, Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew says, "I tell you the truth, unless you become as little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, we're not going to ask you to get up out of your seat or anything like that. When we say enter the kingdom of heaven there, I believe it means understand spiritual things, be in on spiritual realities. All right, so Jesus says, right, little children, there's something about them that is able to access this level of spirit. And Plato's theory of anamnesis says, as a baby, we know everything, but sense perception and education override this knowledge. This is the homeless bard, and we took a picture of this up in Trafalgar Square. This is a quote from the Taoist sage Lao Tzu. "At the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are, and you know what you want." This is the idea that inside us, if we can only access it, is knowledge, understanding at a deep level. How do we do that? Well, more later on. What's the basis in science for this? Well, where did we come from? Hang it all. What you and I are made of, people would say is stardust, what is left over from stars that have exploded and so on. We're made of materials that are just part of the universe. So it's not surprising if we carry, it wouldn't be surprising for us to carry with us some sort of memory of what the universe is really like in us. And if you like universe, whether you believe in God or not, we're here. Somehow universe has produced us. There must be something in universe that's able to produce such awesome beings as you and me. All right? So if we are part of universe, then there's got to be part of us that is joined up to it, and from that we can get understanding and maybe a handle on using universe more successfully than we're able to just in the world of the five senses. Trafalgar Square again. Anybody know where this one is? It's a marble block, a baby boy in the middle of it. Next time you're in Trafalgar Square, you must look at this. It's a marble block, very big, just outside St Martin in the Fields. It's a baby boy. Round it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Very moving statue, or sculpture, right? It's showing our link with the universe, that we feel like we emerge from the universe. How we do that, we don't know necessarily. We might have beliefs about it, but that's where we've come from. So not surprising if we don't carry with us some of what universe is all about. This one doesn't come over very well. In the middle you've got a Fibonacci curve. If you're not sure what that is, wave a hand, will you? A Fibonacci curve. Right, the Fibonacci series goes 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. Basically, write 1 again, add the 2 together, you get 2. Write 1 and 2, you get 3. Write 2 and 3, you get 5. Write 3 and 5, you get 8. That's the Fibonacci series. The spiral in the middle is a Fibonacci spiral. A fetus on the left looking very much like it. A galaxy on the right looking very much like it. Okay, that's a visual presentation of us coming from the universe. This is the Chandogya Upanishad from Hinduism, 6th century BCE. And in it, the father is saying to his son, "Thou art that, Tattvam Asi." Basically, pointing to the stuff around him and saying, that stuff out there, that's you. You are part of that. Okay, now back to something a bit more Western. Professor J.B.S. Haldane once shrewdly remarked in 1927, "The universe is not only queerer than we imagine, it is queerer than we can imagine." So we need to get used to that. Anybody here remember how old they were when they realised that their mind was not able to understand absolutely everything? And maybe you felt a bit annoyed about it. Anybody want to give their age?
35.
35. All right. I was about 14, and I was angry. I wanted to see the manager. I really, I'd been told, education, develop your mind, you can do whatever. And I realised that no, you can't. There's a load of stuff you can never know, and I was a bit upset. Anyway, it's hard enough to imagine four-dimensional space, but the maths, so I'm told, is pretty straightforward. Here's a question. Can meditation or mystical insight take us further? Right? Like a sense of oneness with all things. And then the quote in Sanskrit, Tattvamasi, thou art that, from the Chandogya Upanishad. Is Stephen here with his book on David Bohm? You can have the David... Yeah, if you talk to Stephen a bit later on, this book, David Bohm explores this kind of thing in lots of detail, and you can find out more then on that. Right, okay. Well, It won't cost you a lot off the internet, and it's nearly 5 past. Nearly there. Right. How close is, inverted commas, heaven? We aren't talking about where you go when you die. We're talking about a spiritual kind of area, dimension, that people would say you can access, right? Jesus said, let the little children come to me, do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. So children are able to see things often that adults can't see, understand things, because with the eyes of a child, you will see. So this is where we wind down towards our tea or coffee. The kingdom of heaven belongs to little children. The kingdom of heaven, according to the New Testament, is within you. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, quite close, right? Maybe we can get to find it if we look in the right place and if we look in the right way. And I think that's where we finish for this bit. Yep, we'll be into Berkeley afterwards, but sorry, it's a little bit of a rush, but time is not on our side. If we can locate that pad, that will be ever so good. But I think we're coming to... Awesome, thank you. If you haven't written on it, please will you do so. As I say, you will get the PowerPoint, the reading list, and you also get the book that I'm writing in desperately draft form. But yeah, people have been moaning at me to do it for a long time. This winter in Wales, we started. But anyway, that's what you'll get if you put your name and your legible email on that. Thanks for bearing with us. It'll be slower in the second half.
Jeannie, do you want to